Once upon a time, each of us in this room was about this big. And each of us in this room was very, very hungry for our first nourishment on the outside, as opposed to the womb. This is a story that really happened. No alternative facts. This really happened. That is about our first nourishment, our hunger. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine visited me with her 6-week-old baby. She was nursing the baby, and she told me that it had been really hard to learn to nurse, which surprised me. I didn't really know that many women find it difficult to learn to nurse. So she said, women don't live anymore, usually, in a family compound where they observe from childhood their aunts and their mothers and their sisters nursing. It's a private thing. We do it alone, upstairs in a rocking chair. So what she did was to call La Leche, which is an organization that encourages women to nurse instead of use bottle feeding. They sent a representative to my friend who told her a story. And this is a story of Sophie, who is probably still a gorilla, born in captivity in a laboratory and raised in the laboratory, observed, of course, by a circle of scientists all along. Well, when Sophie started menstruating, they brought in a male gorilla, and I hope they gave them some time alone. Anyway, they conceived a baby gorilla, and when the baby came forth, Sophie was thrilled, and she held her arms out and held the baby's little shoulders, and the baby was screaming and crying, and Sophie got more and more upset because she didn't know what to do. The scientists called La Leche. And La Leche came with 15 nursing women. And they made a circle around Sophie, sitting on the floor, each one with her baby. And at a count of 5, they all began together the same moment to nurse their babies. And Sophie was holding hers, and she heard all these sounds of sucking, and they sounded good. And she smelled the smells of nursing, of the milk coming, and she saw that every mother and every child seemed delighted. And she pulled toward herself her own baby. And Sophie offered the baby a nipple, and the baby stopped crying and began to suck. And that just shows to me that we do learn from each other and that we all need community.
This is a story I've told before, I think, but maybe not all of you have been here to hear it. It's from the Appalachian. And I love stories with mistaken identity, and that's what this one is. Well, once there was an old woman, And she lived in a cabin on the side of the hill above the town, and she had all of the money that she had in the world in a tin can on the mantelpiece over the fireplace. And she also had an old dried fish. And she hung that fish on a nail next to the fireplace. And that fish didn't have but one eye, so she called him Old One Eye. Well, every night she would sit and card her wool, and when she had yawned 3 times, she'd pick up her butcher knife, cut herself a piece out of that old dried fish, eat it, and go to bed. Well, one day, a band of robbers came into the town. There were 3 robbers in the band, and one of them only had one eye. So they called him Old One Eye. And she called her fish, of course, Old One Eye. Well, they heard all about this woman and how she kept all that money in that tin can on the mantelpiece over the fireplace. So they decided to rob her. And the old one-eyed robber sent one of them up to case the place, see the best way to rob it. And he went up, walked all around the house, found a chink in the wall right next to the fireplace on the same side as the old dried fish. And he put his eye up to the wall, and he watched. There she was, carding her wool, and pretty soon she yawned. She said, well, that's 1 come. 2 more, and I'm going to have me a piece out of you. Well, that scared that robber. He ran down, and he said, she's a witch. She saw me right through the wall. She's waiting for you 2 to come, and she's going to get us all. Let's get out of here. The old one-eyed robber said, you're nothing but an old scaredy cat. And he sent the other robber up to see what he could find. So he walked all around that cabin, found that same chink between the log, and put his eye up. There she was, rocking away. And pretty soon, she yawned again. She said, well, now, that's 2 come. 1 more, and I'm going to have me a piece out of you. And he ran down the hill and said, he's right. She saw me. She's just waiting for you to come, and she's going to get us all. Oh, the old one-eyed robber said, you're both nothing but old scary cats. I'll just go up there myself. So he went up, walked all around that cabin, found that same chink between the logs, put his one good eye up to that hole, and he watched, and there she was, rocking and rocking, carding and carding, and pretty soon she yawned again. And she picked up that butcher knife, and she said, well, now, that's 3 come, and old One Eye, I'm now going to have a piece out of you. That old one-eyed robber took off running. He didn't even wait when he got to you. Come on, let's get out of here. She's coming after us. The little old woman, she cut herself a piece of that old dried fish, and she ate it and went to bed and slept real sound.
This is a story taken from a story written by H. Munro, who was an English writer in the early 20th century, and he went by the name of Saki, S-A-K-I, and his stories are very lively and very good. So this is one of them. There were two English women, Amanda and Laura. They were very close friends, and it was known generally that Laura had received the doctor had said that she had a terminal illness. And Amanda was very concerned, and she said, Laura, what did the doctor tell you? And Laura said, he's given me 2 months to live. Amanda said, Laura, you're going to die in 2 months? And Laura said, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to leave off being Laura, and I'll be something else. I'll be an Ethiopian boy. And Amanda was shocked. She said, Ethiopian, African, and a boy? And Laura said, "Oh, don't be silly, Amanda. After all, the African tradition and customs are very rich and rewarding, and besides, in those societies, it's important to be a boy because it makes life easier." Amanda was quiet. She didn't say anything. And Laura went on. She said, I think as a matter of fact, I'm going to come back as an animal. I know that we humans are supposed to be animals, but the wild creatures have so much, their capabilities are extraordinary. I've always been sort of partial to otters. They're so graceful and so lithe, and they always look as if they're having a good time. I think I'll come back as an otter. Amanda said nothing. She saw clearly that Laura was, as they say, around the bend. But she said nothing. And it so happened that in 2 months, Laura did die, and Amanda observed all of the customary activities and civilities. And then when that was over, she realized that Laura's birthday was coming around. What shall I do for Laura's birthday? She's no longer here. I can't celebrate with her. I know what I'll do. I'll go to the zoo and look at the otters in her memory. And she was very pleased with herself for this whimsical idea. So she went to the zoo, and she stood behind the fence looking at the pool with the otters, and she said Laura was right. They do have a good time, and they are so graceful. One of them arched its back and sliced into the water, swam under the water, and came right up in front of where Amanda was standing. And it looked at her fixedly with its great eyes. Those were Laura's eyes, even to the drooping left eyelid and the mischievous glint in her eye. Oh, it was eerie, and it was real. And Amanda screamed, a side-splitting scream, and fled from the zoo. She never remembered how she got home, but her hysteria was so distressing and so extreme that her husband sought psychiatric help. But the experts could not divine her babble and what she said. And so her husband took her to a very well-known rest home in southern Italy. And the surroundings there were so beautiful, and the serenity was so healing that Amanda did very well. So her husband went back to London to take care of his business affairs. And one morning he received a telephone call from the chief medical officer at the rest home, who said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, to tell you that your wife has had a setback, a serious relapse. Her hysteria was so bad we had to sedate her heavily, so she is now sleeping. But you must come as soon as you can." And her husband said, "But what caused it? What triggered it? What provoked this attack?" And the medical officer said, "We do not know. It was a perfectly ordinary, average day." And the nurse who was on duty woke her up, and then her morning tea was brought in by one of our specially trained Ethiopian boys. We need to have you come right away. This is a story from a collection by Jane Yolen, but I don't think she's the author of the story. We don't know where it comes from. It's about a man who lived very happily. He had a good wife, he had lovely children, he had a successful business and a great circle of friends, but he was possessed with the idea of finding truth. He wanted to know what was truth, and he asked everyone always, and he was truly obsessed with it. Finally, his wife said, "Since this is dominating your life, it's time you went off and found it." So he left, and he wandered and traveled many days. And finally, one day, in the wilderness, he saw up on the side of a hill a cave, and someone was standing in the cave. So he thought, perhaps that person knows. When he came close to it, he found it was a woman who was very, very old and extremely ugly. She was just all warped, and her skin was twisted and wrinkled, just like parchment. Her body was bent, her hair was straggly, she had few teeth, but when she spoke, he felt that he wanted to stay and listen to what she had to say. And when she talked, she told what he felt was truth. And he stayed with her. He stayed for a year and a day, sitting at her feet, listening to her talk, and trying to absorb everything that she said. And finally he decided that it was time to go home, that he could take in no more. So he told her of his intention, and he said, "Oh, my Lady Truth, you have given me so much. There is no way that I can reward you or pay you back for what you have bestowed upon me. But perhaps there is something you would like me to tell my people. Is there a message that you would have that I can take home to all of my friends?" And she said yes. And her face spread into a beautiful smile, quite beautiful, because all of the parchment wrinkles came out. And she leaned forward and said, tell them that I am young and beautiful."
This is a story about a farmer, his two sons, and his party-going, fun-loving daughter. Now, the farmer was very wealthy. He had a lot of land, and he had a great big house, 161 rooms. His sons were hard workers. They worked on the farm and kept it going, and his daughter was a party-goer. Well, the farmer was in the autumn of his years, so he decided, I think it's time I've established myself a will. But I don't want to just give everything to my kids. I want them to earn it. So he sat down and he thought for quite a while, several days, finally came up with a solution. Called his lawyer, they went over it and agreed with it. And the farmer went back home, and in a few weeks he took to his bed and died. Now the will said that following his death and following his burial, each one of his children would be given £1. And they would take that pound and go out and buy whatever they could, which would fill every one of those rooms from the floor to the ceiling. Well, now the older boy took his money, his £1, hooked up his team to the wagon and went out into the countryside, and he bought all of the old mattresses and ticks and pillows and anything he could find that had feathers in it. He brought them all back to the house, put them in the rooms, slit them open with his knife, and he filled every room with feathers from floor to ceiling. Then he called the lawyer and he went around to investigate, to make sure it was true. Well, by the time they got through 161 rooms, it took a while. Those rooms at the end of the investigation had settled down. The feathers had become compacted. They no longer reached the ceiling. And so the lawyer said, "I'm sorry, you have failed." Well, now the second boy took his money, went out and came back a very short time. He had several boxes in which he had candles. He put a candle in every room. Then he lit every one of the candles, and he told the lawyer, "I have put light in every room." The lawyer agreed, and they went out on an inspection tour. Well, by the time they got to the end of the tour, some of those candles had burned themselves out. So those rooms were dark, and he too failed. Now it was the party-going, fun-loving daughter's turn. She took her pound and went out and bought herself a penny whistle. She came back and opened all the doors, sat in the hallway and played her penny whistle and told the lawyer, "I have filled every room with music. Not only that, I have put every room, all the people in there are very happy and joyful. There's a lot going on. They're smiling a great deal at the sound of the music, and they're very active. I put activity in those rooms because they're tapping their feet up and down to the rhythm of the music." So she inherited the farm and the house. Now, is she still the fun-loving, party-going girl she once was? Maybe she's the farmer's wife. Maybe she's the farmer herself. We don't know. We'll have to ask her. I call this one driving with my father. Now, my father loved his horses, probably as much as he loved his family. Nothing could be simpler than driving a team of horses. Pull on the right rein, they turn right. Pull on the left rein, they turn left. You pull back on both and say one word, and they all stop. You want them to go, you say one word and give a little flip of the reins, and off they go. That was just beautiful. Dad loved that. So when he moved into a Model T Ford, things got a little complicated. Those pedals on the floor, that brake thing over here, that hand accelerator on that steering wheel, 1/4 turn and you made a complete right angle. He managed with that, and then when we got 3 on the floor, things got a little difficult too. There's that clutch. There's a brake over here to put on. There's that gear shift you got to maneuver. And there's that steering wheel. The steering wheel was a little more kind than the one on the Model T Ford. But that wasn't the biggest problem Dad had in driving. His vision was the problem at night. Oncoming lights totally blinded him. So if we went anywhere at night, somebody else always drove. Dad didn't. Now, he and I had been up to the lake that day to visit my brother, who was working there for the summer. We stayed much longer than we had planned, so when we got ready to go, the sun had already gone down. We had 60 miles to go. Well, Dad started out, and it only lasted, 20 minutes, and he gave it up. Turned it over to me. I was glad he did. I felt safer with me than I did with him. We got along fine. The old Chevy just purred beautifully, and we were within 5 miles of home when I met this oncoming car, and I dimmed my lights as usual. Then I noticed in the rearview mirror the stoplights of that car came on, and it turned around and came back. A little odd, I thought. Must be somebody wanted to talk to Dad and they recognized the car. But that proved to be false when a red light appeared in my rearview mirror. That meant only one thing. Officer Ted Hansen was on the prowl. Officer Hansen patrolled US 89 from Junction in the south to Richfield in the north, and he was known to be out at night. Good evening, sir. Good evening. When you dimmed your lights as you met me, and I'm glad you did you know that you only had one light? No, I did not. Well, you do. You only have one light. Not only is it against the law, but it's dangerous. So I'm going to give you a fix-it ticket just to remind you to get that taken care of as soon as possible. May I see your driver's license? I don't have one. You don't have a driver's license? No, sir. How old are you? 15. 15? And who are you? I'm the boy's father. You're his father, and you let him drive, knowing that he didn't have a license. Dad launches into this long dissertation of why the officer was not interested or amused in any way. May I see your license, please? Well, that took a bit of hunting. First, we had to find the wallet, which we finally located. Then we had to find the license within the wallet. I knew he had one. He said he got it simply by filling out a form. He didn't have to prove he ever knew how to drive. Just fill out this form, mail it in, you get a license. And it says right on the license, good until revoked. The license found was handed over to the officer who started his paperwork. When he was finished, he handed the license and the paperwork back. He looked at my father, and then he looked at me. He looked at my father, he looked back at me, and then he said, Mr. Johnson, I think you better let the boy drive home. With that, he whirled around, went back to his patrol car, and left. I started the old Chevy, put in the clutch, put it in first, and away we went in stone silence. But I didn't get the ticket. Concerns a young man who's trying to find out why he doesn't have any luck. This goes way back in history, back when animals could talk to humans and trees could talk and that sort of thing. Well, this young man in the village had everything he really needed, but he kept saying he didn't have any luck. Everybody else has luck, and I don't have any luck. So he went to the wise old lady in the village and asked her what to do. And she said, you must go to the edge of the earth and speak to the Great Spirit. Okay, so he put on his backpack, he got ready to go. He didn't have any idea which direction to walk or how far it would take him, but he headed out. And he walked and he walked and he walked, and finally he came to a little area where there was a group of wolves having a wonderful time, just playing and having a wonderful time, except for one. There was this wolf standing there, skinny, its fur in terrible shape, its tail bent, looked like it was going to die right on the spot. And the wolf spoke to the young man and said, where are you going? I'm going to the edge of the earth to see the Great Spirit, to find out why I don't have any luck. Oh, will you ask him something for me? Yeah. Will you ask him why it is I don't have any energy? I don't have any way of doing things. I can't go play with my friends. I don't have energy to do that. Yes, I'll ask him. So off the boy went, walking and walking and walking and walking. And finally he came to a very pretty little house, all painted white, with a white picket fence around it. And he knocked on the door, and a very pretty young lady came out. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Come in, and I will fix you a nice big dinner. Where are you going? I'm going to the edge of the earth to find the Great Spirit so I can find out why I don't have any luck. Will you ask him something for me? Yes, I will. Will you ask him why it is I'm so lonely all the time? Yes, I will. And then he went off again, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked. And he came to an area where there was a group of trees, beautiful trees, straight and tall as they could be, lovely, except for one. And here was this old tree there. leaves falling down, branches bent. It looked terrible. "Where are you going?" the tree asked. "I'm going to find the Great Spirit at the edge of the earth. Find out why I don't have any luck." "Will you ask him something for me?" "Yes, I will." "Will you ask him why it is I'm here with all my friends, yet look at me and look at them. I can't grow tall, I don't have any leaves to stay on, my bark is falling off." "Yes, I will ask him." And he walked and he walked and he walked, and he finally came to the edge of the earth. And he leaned over and spoke, "Great Spirit, I'm here to find out why I don't have any luck." There was a rather prolonged silence. "It's because you're stupid. Luck is all around you. Open your eyes and look for it. It's there." "Yes, yes, Great Spirit, I shall." So he turned around and he started walking back, and he walked and he walked and he walked, and he came to the little grove of trees again. "Oh, did you see the Great Spirit?" asked the tree. "Yes, I did. And he told me to keep my eyes open and look around. Luck was out here all the time." "Did you ask him for me?" "I did. And he said the reason you're not growing is below you is this great big chest of gold, and your roots can't get down to where they need to get you food." "Oh, well, there's a shovel. Go dig it out. You can have it." "No, I can't do that. I've got to go look for my luck. Keep my eyes open. You'll have to get somebody else to dig it out." And with that, he left. And he walked and he walked and he walked. And he came to the little white house with the picket fence. He knocked again on the door, and the same beautiful young lady came out. "Oh, you're back." "Yes." "Did you get to see the Great Spirit?" "I spoke with him." "And what did he say?" "He said luck was everywhere. Just open your eyes and you'll find it." "Did you ask for me?" "I did. And he said the reason you're lonely is you need a husband." "Oh, will you be my husband?" "No, I can't be your husband. I've got to go look for my luck. I can't do that. You'll have to get somebody else." And he walked and he walked, and he finally came to where the wolves were playing. "Did you see the Great Spirit?" "Yes, I did. And he said to keep my eyes open and keep looking because luck is out there all the time." "Did you ask him for me?" "I did. And he said the reason you don't have any energy that way is you don't eat enough. He told me to tell you specifically that you were to eat the next animal you saw." And he did.
About 2 months ago, I think, I saw an article in the paper, which I read from cover to cover, including all the ads, that in Cairo, they were planning on putting up a high-rise apartment house. But before they did that, they called the archaeologists to come in, and they dug down into the earth, and they discovered a huge, huge statue of Ramses II. And they were very excited about it. Unfortunately, it turned out not to be him. But that reminded even the author of the article of Percy Bysshe Shelley's story, Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said
Two vast and trunkless legs of stand in the desert. Beside them, on the sand, half buried, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and curled lip and sneer of cold command tell of those passions which too well the sculptor knew and put on these lifeless things. The heart that fed them and the hand that mocked. On the pedestal, these words appeared. I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains, only the decay of this colossal round, and around it all, boundless and bare, level and lone, the endless sand stretches far away. Well, this is a long story. In fact, it's probably 3 stories to get all wound together. So please be patient with me. Several years ago, maybe many years ago, I went to a festival of storytelling, and there was a lady there who was a professional storyteller. Her name was Jackie. I do not know what her last name is, and I understand she has passed away, but she always remains in my heart. And she told this story, story 1. She said that she was going through the southern states one summer looking for some more stories to add to her repertoire. It was hot, and it was humid, and there were bugs, and she was thoroughly miserable, and she thought, oh, I'd just give anything for a glass of water. And sure enough, around a curve here, she found a house, and on the front porch of the house, there was an old lady sitting. And she thought, I bet if I asked that old lady southern kindness and hospitality, she'd at least get me a glass of water. So she stopped and walked up to the old lady and said, I'm so hot and miserable. Do you think I could have a glass of water? And the old lady said, oh, yes, we have the best well in town. It's really good cold water. So she hopped up and off she went and got the glass of water. And they both sat there on the porch drinking the water and shooting the bull. And lady Jackie noticed that there was a funny little house off to one side. It was very small and rather dilapidated, but it was obviously a house because it had a chimney. It had a fireplace. It wasn't just a storage room. So the old lady said to her, oh, I see you're looking at that house. That's the house I was born in many years ago. And that, when we lived in that house, it was my mother and my father and my 4 brothers and me. Well, my 4 brothers were really rowdy boys and a bit older than I was. So my mother always made me a pallet on the floor by the fireplace for me to go to bed at night. The boys had to sleep up in the loft because they were too noisy and too rough. One morning I woke up and Mother wasn't there cooking breakfast, and I was hungry. And I thought, where's Mother? So eventually Daddy came in, and he went into the little tiny bedroom that they shared, and he said, oh, I heard him cry, no, oh, Susie, no. I couldn't imagine what was the matter. I was only about 4 years old, and I hadn't had a lot of experience in the world. So Daddy came out and he ran outside and he went to the neighbors and came back in, and he was obviously very upset. But nobody was getting me my breakfast. So I kept saying, I want my breakfast. I want my breakfast. But nobody was paying any attention. So the next thing I know, the next door neighbor man came over, and he and my daddy were sawing and hammering, and they were making a box. It was about so long and not too wide. And then they went into the bedroom and they picked up my mother and they carried her out and put her in the box. I couldn't imagine what in the world they thought they were doing. Then they put some more boards over the top of the box and they nailed it shut. They nailed my mother into that box. Besides, I wanted my breakfast. And where was Mother going to make my breakfast in a box? Then they called all the neighbors, and everybody came. And Daddy hitched up our 2 white horses to the wagon, and they put the box in the wagon. Well, I screamed and yelled. They were not going to leave me behind with no breakfast and my mother in this box. I was going with my mother. So I climbed up into the wagon and I would not let them take me out. I fussed and fussed until they finally said, oh, forget it, let her be there. And I looked at those boards and I looked at those boards and I saw there was a little knot hole where the branch had made a hole in the board. So I stuck my finger in there. And sure enough, I could feel my mother. I could feel her face. And I thought, what in the world are they doing? Why are they putting my mother in this box? So then Daddy whipped up the horses and all the people followed along. And we went down the road to the cemetery, which wasn't very far away. And they got to the fence of the cemetery, and the horses stopped. They would not pull at all, at all. And Daddy actually took his whip and he hit the horses, but they still would not go through the gate into the cemetery. So finally, some of the men came back and they picked up this box with my mother in it, and they took it into the cemetery, and there was a hole in the ground, just the right size for that box. And they put my mother in that box, in that hole. And then they filled it up with dirt. I was just completely confused. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And Daddy said, come on, honey, I'll take you home. So we went back to the house, and the people all came, and they brought food, and it was very nice. It was like a big party, but I was so worried about my mother in that box, in that hole in the ground. So finally, the people left. The boys went off home with some of their friends, and it was just me and my dad. And then he didn't turn on any lights, and he was sitting by the window looking out and had his head in his hands, and every once in a while he'd say, oh, Susie, what will happen to us? So then I went to look out the window to see what he was seeing. And there, coming out of the gate of the cemetery, was something white. Couldn't really see it, what it was, but it moved. It moved. It looked like a person. It looked like a person walking. And as it got closer and closer, I could see there was blood all down the front of the white gown that this person was wearing. And so I said, Daddy, what's that? And my daddy looked up and he said, oh, Susie, no. And then The figure came right up to our house, and there was a knocking at the door. And my father said, no, Susie, go back. Don't haunt us. Don't haunt us. We didn't know that this was going to happen. I couldn't imagine what in the world he was talking about, because obviously that was my mother. So I finally said to my daddy, that was Mother. That's Mother out there. Open the door. Undo the bar across the door. No, he said, no, she has to go back to the graveyard where she belongs. Mother doesn't belong in the graveyard. Mother belongs here with us, getting us some supper. So my father said, oh, yes, but I finally made such a fuss about it. Again, I was good at making fusses. Daddy finally unbarred the door, and sure enough, there, standing in front of the door with her hands clasped to her chest and blood running all down the front of her, was my mother. And my father said, Susie, is it you? And my mother said, yes, John, it's me, let me in. And he said, you're not dead? And she said, no, John, I'm not dead, let me in. So my father brought her in and sat her down and said, what's going on? And so she said, well, I don't know what it was, but it was some kind of a trance or a fit of some sort of. I could hear you talking, but I couldn't move a muscle. I could hardly breathe. And then, as you know, you made a coffin for me, and you took me down to the cemetery. And the only thing that kept me going was the fact that I could feel Maggie's little finger feeling through that knothole. And so, it got dark, and it was a real spooky night because it was Halloween. And she said there was somebody digging on my grave. I thought, who in the world is that? Well, as it turned out, I won't tell you who the neighbors are because I don't want to put a smudge on their names, but there was two men, and they opened the coffin, and they started searching around to see if there was anything valuable in there. Well, the only thing they could see was my wedding ring. And so they tried to get it off. Well, as you know, John, it was really tight. And so they couldn't get it off, and one of them pulled out a knife and he cut off my finger. And the shock of that pain brought me out. And I sat up in the coffin and said, what are you doing? And they ran away. So I just climbed out and came back to you and to Maggie. And so my father was unspeakably happy to have his wife back, even with missing a finger. And she lived a very, very long life after that. And that's my story of the horses that would not go into the graveyard.